Hi, hi everyone. We're going to give it a minute or so to let folks trickle in. Happy Thursday. Okay, we're going to get started about a minute in. As people will start trickling in, they'll hear the intro as well. But hi everyone, I'm Ariana Bankler-Jukes. I am the Advocacy Manager and Organizer here at SCAMP. We are excited today to do a different spin on our usual How We Got It Built project case study series, where we feature developers, feature community groups that have built supportive housing or affordable housing and walk us through their process and the lessons learned during it. We're excited about today because this is a continuation of another roundtable series that we've been working on alongside the Domestic Violence Homeless Services Coalition, focusing on providing services for survivors in affordable housing. So excited to explore these two projects that are built with DV survivors in mind. And so I'm going to hand it over to Amy, who will do a little bit of background about the coalition. Before I do give it to her, and I want to remind folks, this will be recorded and the slides will be sent out afterwards. And we're grateful for you all to be here. So Amy, take it away.
Thanks, Ariana. Hello, everyone. So nice to be together. The Domestic Violence and Homeless Services Coalition envisions a world where no individual or family has to choose between stable housing and a life free from violence. And as the CEO of Downtown Women's Center, I have the privilege of co-leading the coalition with our partners at Rainbow Services. Since 2017, our coalition has grown to 250 organizations, including Yasmin's with Jenesee, and over 1,000 people strong. And we uplift survivor voices to facilitate cross-sector systems change and alignment with an emphasis on integrated, trauma-informed, permanent housing pathways. And if you're new to the Domestic Violence Homeless Services Coalition, we hope that you will check us out. When I stop yammering, I will put the website in the chat for you to hit the join us button and we'll stay connected that way. So given that our focus is so lasered on permanent housing pathways for domestic violence survivors or gender-based violence survivors, partnering with SCAMP on a number of these events was just an obvious partnership, and we've been so happy to uplift the work that's been done in the field and to also talk about where we can be going as developers and service providers to impact more housing opportunities for survivors. Listening to and making space at the table for survivors themselves is critical to our work together, especially given some feedback that I'll share in just a moment about what they express they really need in permanent supportive housing. And that's led us to the purpose of today, which is twofold. It's lifting up the voice of the survivors and what they need and responding to the field of developers who want to build housing for survivors, who have already done so and have questions and considerations that we will try to address today. We'll also leave you with some questions that we're grappling with too, and we'll be learning more as we build these projects. So excited to highlight two projects. We'll start with the one that Downtown Women's Center is most involved with our fabulous development partner, Gray Commoner, with one of the partners with Daylight Community Development. We'll flash up some slides.
Let's see if we can do this. All right, can you see the screen?
Yeah, thanks, Greg.
Hi.
So further to the voice of survivors themselves, not too long ago, about 2019, and throughout the whole time with the coalition, this has been an ongoing conversation of what survivors really need, particularly in supportive housing. So I just really want to lift up their voice that we've been hearing through some targeted focus groups, and then again throughout just our normal conversations as coalition members together. Countywide, survivors of gender-based violence currently living in permanent supportive housing, so across the county, multiple buildings, have expressed sentiments like they feel housed but abandoned, that they want to build economic stability, but they feel trapped by the benefits cliff and still obviously needing affordable housing, but unable to move up their salaries because they risk losing that affordable housing in the process. They feel immense stress from triggers that emerge from housing environments that remind residents of past trauma, mostly including behaviors of potentially other tenants, most likely other guests that have come in, and they feel like some behaviors are not being addressed. And they feel that there's a desire for a deeper understanding of service providers and property managers in particular to understand trauma and complex PTSD. Now, DWC is a provider of permanent supportive housing, so we group ourselves into this feedback, and we continuously want to use this feedback to improve our services. And we thought we should lift up the voice further and help us all improve our work for survivors. So we published a toolkit that sits on the DV Homeless Services Coalition's website on how to do this, how to build supportive housing, from those very first ideas of we should do this to operating for years to come. So we've built a toolkit that we hope speaks to this audience of service providers, developers, property managers, and architects in particular. We feel that if we build well for survivors, we will be building well for all. So I'm so happy to get to start to put this into practice with our development partners, with Greg. We'll start to share more about a project that's soon to open.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Let me get this out of the way. Hi, everyone. My name is Greg Commodore. I'm a partner at Daylight Community Development. We are developing the Noho 50/50 project in partnership with the Downtown Women's Center and Decro Corporation. It's a joint venture between our three organizations to build affordable and supportive housing for survivors of domestic violence and low-income families. The project is located in North Hollywood in the Noho Arts District, a nice high-income neighborhood in close proximity to transit, public amenities such as a public park, healthcare services, and we were really excited by this particular site. When we first started considering building a project with the Downtown Women's Center, what was really exciting about this specific site is that it's a half a mile walk from the Red Line station in North Hollywood, which is a direct subway line directly to Downtown Women's Center through the Little Tokyo metro station, which I think is closed right now, but it was open. And it will be open. And the goal is that folks from this building can take that metro line directly to Downtown Women's Center to get services at their day center and their healthcare clinic. So the project, as we'll get into in terms of design, is 40 units, 4 studios, 32 one-bedrooms, and 8 two-bedrooms. There are 32 PSH units, all for survivors, and 7 affordable units. The site had a 6-unit bungalow style apartment on it. So we went through relocation and worked with each of the families to ensure that they had an appropriate housing plan while the project was being constructed. Of those 6 families, actually 4, I believe 4 are coming back. And one little sort of nice side story is one of the households. It's a mother and a son who I've actually gotten close with over the last couple of years developing this project. The son is studying to be a civil engineer at Cal State University Northridge and has been interning with the construction team on site, and ultimately is helping to build the project that he and his mom will live in when it's complete. So kind of a nice full circle, and a way to take sort of a challenge of relocation and making it a positive. We'll get into the financing of the project, but these projects cannot happen without a vast variety of partners, both on the financing, the entitlement, design, and construction team. We have, the construction team is led by Dreyfus Construction. The architect is FSY, who's actually the designer of both of these projects. I don't know how Scamp ended up doing that, but that's sort of a nice nice element. And the project is financed with 4% tax credits, California state credits, an award and loan from the City of Los Angeles's HHH program, a loan from LA County Development Authority through the No Place Like Home program, and 32 project-based vouchers from the Housing Authority. Keep this moving. As you can see, the site is very thin. It's a 50 by 250 site. So very little street frontage, and it's pretty deep. And this is a site that definitely had its issues in terms of access and sort of fire department issues in terms of, getting resources from the street all the way to the back of the site. And I actually had to pitch VJ, who's the head, one of the principals at FSY Architects. He didn't want to design this building. So, the pitch was there are a lot of sites that are this sort of thin and deep. And if we can make this work, there are a lot of sites that are similar and can have this type of design. So the vast majority of the services are here on the first floor. We have 3 case management offices, a leasing office, a learning center, a conference room, and then a very generous community room and back patio in the back, and then housing upstairs on floors 2 through 5. We have 2 bedrooms at each end of the corridor and 1 bedroom and studio PSH units in between. Here are some additional renderings and cross sections of the building. I think FSY has done a really nice job to design something that's a really beautiful building. As you can see in this cross section, there's parking behind the community space on that first floor in the podium, and then an exterior corridor that has airflow directly for all the way through the units. Right, so we have windows on the corridor side as well as on the other side. And as you can see, it's very skinny and deep. Here's currently where we are. This is actually a few months ago, but Dreyfus has been doing a great job of taking drone footage of the site progress. We've now moved into stucco and sort of, drywall and all of those sort of finished elements. The building is expected to be done in September. There are obviously issues that come up. We're dealing with some DWP issues and some, and obviously, there are other things that come up, as we all know. But ultimately, this has been a pretty smooth construction process, and we're excited to get pre-leasing started and to get this thing occupied. So how did we do this during pre-development? As we all know, it is a marathon to get these projects complete. So I'll tell a story in 2019. So Daylight was founded at UCLA Anderson. We were all business school students, and in the second year of business school, we were introduced to Amy through another sort of mutual contact in the affordable housing landscape and in tenant rights advocate. And we kind of pitched her on this idea of doing a supportive housing project in North Hollywood. And she picked up the phone. She can tell you herself, but she picked up the phone. We had a great conversation. And this project is actually sort of that result, is the fact that Amy was willing to have a conversation and expand Downtown Women's Center's reach outside of the downtown Skid Row community into North Hollywood. So we're really proud of that. We bought the site in April of 2019. At that time, there was both an HHH and a No Place Like Home NOFA. We secured funding from both of those critical resources for the project. This was a project that had a density bonus. So despite it being in the highest TOC transit tier, and I'm going to go kind of detailed on the entitlement for a second. Despite being in the highest transit tier, it was also subject to one of those old CRA plans. It was in a CRA plan area, which restricted the density. So we had to go through the off-menu density bonus route, even though it was a TOC tier 4 site. And we went through, we had a CUP and a public hearing. And we'll get into community outreach in the next slide, but the community was really supportive and welcomed this project, which was really nice to see North Hollywood sort of welcome us into that community. After the entitlement, we secured a project-based voucher award from the Housing Authority in early 2020. And then as a project team, we joke that 2020 was the lost year for Noho 50/50. We applied twice for tax credits and were unsuccessful. But ultimately, we got back up on that horse in partnership with the city of LA to get a 4% award in February of 2021. And ultimately closed the project in October of 2021. There were obvious hiccups along the way, but we were able to move the project forward and get it closed and in construction in late 2021. 2022, we were sort of pushing through in construction with an expected completion of September of this year. And then the ultimate goal is to convert to its permanent phase as fast as possible, as soon as we can get the building occupied and convert it and hand the reins over to Amy and her team to provide amazing services on a go-forth basis. Amy, I'm going to turn it back over to you to talk about community outreach.
Yeah, this project is a story of yes in my backyard. I think a story of all the organizing that SCAMP and the Everyone In initiative did, and the leadership of Stephanie Yeager in particular, who runs Noho Home Alliance, and at least at the time sat on the Noho Neighborhood Council. Greg and I have been in public meetings where we cried out of joy. So a very unusual story for permanent supportive housing. We have felt very welcomed to the community, but we've also, done our best and have been very intentional to build relationships and to learn from the community as we built this project. Now our council president, Paul Krikorian, has been incredibly supportive, and his staff too, of the LA City Council. And then the Coalition for Economic Survival have been partners helping us with the relocation process for the families that lived in the previous bungalows there, and that Greg said some will be joining back in the new building.
Amy, I put our logo in here because the community outreach started with us to you.
Okay.
Okay, so this is our capital stack, and I just showed our permanent capital stack, not our construction stack. As we all know, the sort of construction loan, both the tax exempt and the taxable tail, will get us to completion into conversion to get our sort of bridging us to our tax credit equity. But ultimately, this is a 4% deal. That could only be made possible by HHH and No Place Like Home, two amazing programs that have been instrumental into getting this project as well as so many others off the ground. Between HHH and No Place Like Home, I believe it's about $8 million between those two. And on top of that, we have a 4% award and a small state credit award as well. We actually had two different investors for the project. So we had a federal tax credit investor, Redstone, and then they brought in a separate state credit investor that is only focused on state credits. It was all in one limited partnership agreement. But we can answer any questions you may have about that. But that was new to me, but ultimately ended up great because you get better pricing. They were exclusively focused on the state credits. And then on the permanent loan, we have a back-to-back basic from KeyBank. So they're providing the construction financing. And at the permanent stage, they will convert to their permanent loan. And that's underwritten, obviously, by the 32 project-based vouchers from the Housing Authority. Amy, I'm going to turn it back to you. How we got it almost built, because we are not yet in lease up. So I'm going to pass it over to you to talk about sort of lease up considerations and some questions we still obviously have as we move into this stage.
Yeah, I think, the input we've been hearing from survivors is they want to not be isolated, yet safety is paramount. So this is not an undisclosed crisis shelter, obviously. We've just disclosed the address to you today. Because we've walked through a very public process that is required of public housing. But we hope that we have designed for safety, both in our physical architectural design, built design, and in our services, the design of our services and implementation of them. And right now, coordinated entry is changing with new policies in place. And so we are learning. We wish that we could share exactly how this is going to roll, but we are in the process of learning how LISA will go. And Yasmin's a little bit more closer to the LISA process, and we'll have a lot to share in this too. But we are mindful that many survivors don't make their way into coordinated entry. Some might not even be entered into coordinated entry. And some are using programs that are not allowed to use coordinated entry. And thankfully, LA County through LASA has created a workaround for that. But we want to make sure that we're not barring any DV survivors into entry into permanent housing, and we'll work with LASA and the partners that will help us match and lease up into this to make sure that we are targeting these resources for the intended population. So again, I wish I had the answers here too. We will learn as we go. And I'm really excited for you to hear now from Yasmin Tarver, one of our fabulous partners, both through Downtown Women's Center and the Domestic Violence Homeless Services Coalition and their project that they're putting together. And then we'll all loop back and address the really good questions that have already come in thus far.
Okay, Yasmin.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So, as Greg mentioned in the beginning, a lot of the programs have similar funding streams and similar processes. So I'm not going to go over all of them verbatim, just for the time, to give you time to ask questions. So this is the Solaris Apartments. So that's the latest rendering. Next. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Jenesee Center. The Jenesee Center is offering 42 years of life-saving services. We are a nationally recognized nonprofit domestic violence prevention and intervention organization. Jenesee works locally, nationally, and globally to shine a light on violence against women, girls, men, and boys, and advocates the basic human rights for all people to have peace in their homes and their relationships. Genesee's culturally sensitive programs and services not only transition families from crisis to self-sufficiency, but also transforms the lives of its clients and the community by offering education, referrals, and resources beyond shelter. So I thought that was a little bit important that you understand who we are and maybe why we're at the table in this particular project. Next. So these are all of the individuals that are involved in this process. And as you can see, it's quite a lot of people, political, government, city, county organizations, and finance teams. And at the bottom, you can see our primary development team, which is Domus Development, KYCC, better known as Koreatown Youth and Community Center, Jenesee, the architects, and Walton Construction. So next. So the summary of our project that is in local Council District 10 and Supervisor District 2. We will serve low and very low income, chronically homeless survivors and survivors of domestic violence. Our partners, the main partners are Domus Development, KYCC, I'll refer to them as KYCC from now on to keep it short, and Jenesee Center. Construction started in October 2021, and we are hoping construction will be ending in October 2023. As of a meeting we had today, we're about 90% finished. Next. So our general contractor is Walton Construction, the same architects. As you can see, there's similarities in the design, which is great because they get and they understand what we're trying to portray for the individuals and families that are going to move into this building. KYCC and Jenesee Center will be providing the services, and then Domus will be doing with the property management. Next. So the development and approval process. So I didn't quite make a community outreach slide, but our community process calls for our local council districts. And so during this process, we've had 3 different changes in our council districts. So at the beginning of this process, which started way back in 2016, we're now in 2023, it was Herb Wesson. And then we moved on to Margaret Lee Thomas, and now currently we are with Heather Hunt. And so we've seen 3 different iterations of support from Council District 10 as we move along this process. And then currently we have Supervisor Mitchell and Supervisor District 2 when we're talking about the county. And so we also had our local neighborhood council, which was very, very supportive. Now, we did not actually have the smooth sailing that Amy and Greg talked about in the beginning. We had a lot of resistance in the beginning because neighbors didn't understand. They didn't understand DV, and a lot of people thought that DV was just physical, and they thought that we were going to be bringing people into the neighborhood that was going to bring immediate danger. People were concerned about their property values. People were concerned, just everything that they think that they saw on TV, that people are going to be leaving trash and there's going to be bonfires in front of our, this particular housing development. So we really had to do a lot of education and awareness to the community to dispel these rumors or these perceptions or whatever they thought they saw on TV that was actually they thought was going to be in front of the Solaris Apartments. So notwithstanding, after many neighborhood council meetings and other types of meetings, we did get the community buy-in, and we didn't have as much resistance in those meetings. Thankfully, that the neighborhood council understood, and they were very helpful and informative and insistent that this was the type of housing that we needed in this neighborhood. If we talked about, eradicating homelessness, this is one of the ways that we can do so. So that's kind of what our community process was. So then we get to the development and the approval process. So we were right in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic when a lot of our different sign-offs and loans and other things were coming into place. And so there were many challenges that we had with the government, departments, businesses, financial partners, and other community-based organizations, which we needed for this project. And it wasn't that they weren't trying to be helpful, but we're all in the middle of a pandemic and we don't know what's going on. And we are having to continually pivot and adapt to the political, environmental, and safety factors that were happening for all of our organizations. And so having to deal with everyone's changes sometimes kind of slowed the process, and then having the patience and the consideration to understand that we're going through a worldwide pandemic that nobody really knows anything about. So grace is also important. Again, the neighborhood awareness and acceptance, I talked a little about that. The funding process is multiple layers and departments, which Greg talked about. And then we also have delays with LADWP as they're working through, and they're subjected to their different constraints and all their other projects that cause some delays as well. Next. See, I'm so glad I'm not doing this. So our site plan details. So Solaris is 43,413 square feet. We have a total of 43 units. We have 42 rent restricted units and 1 2-bedroom manager's unit. 26 1-bedroom units at 30% AMI and 16 2-bedroom units at 30% AMI. I believe someone mentioned in the chat and I saw really quickly. So our 2 bedrooms, I believe around 783 square feet. And we, the 1 bedrooms, I want to say around 500 and something square feet. Don't quote me, but that's the average. We also have a community room, management and case management offices, and some of the amenities are community garden, laundry, bicycle storage, computer room, and the parking. So next slide. So financing and funding sources. So Greg talked a little bit about this, a little bit the same, different areas. We also have project-based vouchers and we also have tax credits. The total estimated cost of our building so far looks to be projected about I'm just gonna say $30 million. We're just gonna round it off there. Okay, next. So the challenges during the construction, I touched a little bit about that, COVID-19 pandemic, and then just delays with DWP. And so we just continue to work through that process. And hopefully we are hoping that October 2023, we will have light. Next. So the lessons that we have learned so far as working as a collaborative is that patience is so important because we're working with so many different organizations and people that you just have to have patience, bottom line. That education on DV is super important. Again, a lot of people equate DV with just a physical sense, and it's emotional, it's financial, it could be religious in nature, sexual in nature, and people just have their one face of what they feel DV is. And so just educating them that all of the ramifications, and being quite honestly, that there's probably someone in their neighborhood not even gonna move into this building that is experiencing DV. They just don't know, or they could be experiencing DV in themselves. So to put the label that this particular building is going to bring some type of chaos or disruption to the neighborhood, we have to continue to dispel that. Having good partners is critical. Like when you join this together, it's like a big family, and you fight and you get along and you cheer each other. This is a long process. As we mentioned, we've been working on this since 2016, and yeah, it's just a lot. Provide plenty of time for the lease up process. So we're kind of in that process right now. We got not some good news today, so there's a little bit of delay. And so we've been, our TCO has been extended to October. And so we are just working through how that's gonna look like with the coordinated entry system. We are gonna be using the non-HMIS system. And working with them to determine for all of the survivors that apply and making sure that they're protected, but they still have the right to apply for this housing. So we've been working, starting to work more hand in hand with LAHSA as we navigate this process. So we hope in the next couple of months, we will have a more defined system. We have to remember that this is all new. Normally, when people talk about the housing, it's veterans, it's other substance abuse, other high profile areas, not necessarily domestic violence. And so when you start talking domestic violence, everyone's eyes go on and their ears go up because we've never done this before. We've never done this before. So it also creates some type of alarm because it hasn't been done before. And what we have to do is figure out the pathway of how we can do this, because we know that a majority of women who are homeless because of domestic violence. And so even though we put labels on people, they are homeless and they need to have housing. Addressing challenges and issues with the surrounding neighborhoods and businesses. People want to know how this is going to affect their business. How is this going to affect their neighborhood? And then lastly, that this is a process with many moving parts, and flexibility and adaptability are a must. Next. So community impact. So this is what we're hoping. We believe, and this is all of the partners, the developer, KYCC and Genesee Financial, just everyone, that everyone has a right to housing and to have peace in their homes. And we hope that this project moves homeless and DV survivors, individuals, and their families off the street. This partnership is rooting for their success. And we hope that these members become viable and contributing members of their new community. These are people that are going to be using the bus lines, that are going to be shopping at the stores, that are going to be walking their dogs, planting plants. And we want them to embrace the new community that they are now becoming and show the community that they're moving into, that just because they might have had a DV occurrence, that does not make them. They are still humans. They go to work, they have children, they have families, they have a life. They celebrate birthdays. They do everything that we do. They've just had, unfortunately, had the countenance of DV, and that should not discount them from, again, being able to have housing and to have peace in their homes. Next. So basically, I'm a service provider and part of developer, but our developer and our other partner couldn't come on today. So I wanted to also highlight Trevor Portis, who is the project manager at Domus Development, and Rick Kim, who is the Community of Economic Development at KYCC. And I also put their information up here as well so that you can reach out to them. Actually, that rendering that you see right there is the inside courtyard of Solaris. And I didn't mention that all of the pictures that you saw were of Solaris. I was just trying to make sure that you guys got all of the information in a succinct way. So we're hoping, as you see here, as you see mothers and families and males and people with children, that this open space is a green space and it's welcoming. And it allows them to congregate in a community, but it allows them to have a healing in a type of environment as they move on from they once were. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, both groups. And Yasmin, I am so sorry. I don't know what was happening there. That was, yeah, I apologize to everyone. So we're going to get to the Q&A portion. As I was telling folks, please drop any questions you have into the Q&A box. The chat is just a little bit too difficult to manage with people talking back and forth. So I'm going to go through just the questions that were asked in the Q&A box. And it looks like the first few were directed towards Greg and Amy. So question for the Decro Daylight team. What were the 5 biggest obstacles / issues you encountered with Noho or other projects? And how would you like to see those issues solved or improved in the future?
Francisco with 5. Oh my God. So
Yeah.
Francisco is the former FIDO for our other DWC Daylight Decro project. So he was at the housing department. I think now he's at the housing authority. So it's been wonderful working with Francisco. And I believe our current FIDO, Connie, is on the call right now. So hello, Connie. So relocation was really a challenge. This is during COVID. This was during the sort of uncertainty about the eviction moratorium on publicly financed property. Like, it was a real challenge to communicate with families and be able to find them replacement housing during the pandemic. And we started this process very early. We started it in 2019. And we obviously wanted folks to be there as long as possible until we needed to start construction. But that was something that was really challenging. And even though we ended up all sort of becoming friends, development team and the tenants that lived at the building, ultimately you are asking folks to move. And even if they do get a relocation payment to help cover rent and they have a first right to come back to a newly completed building, it's still a challenge. So that was obviously something that was really difficult. And it was really helpful that the council office and Council for Economic Survival was there to sort of help us all, get in a room. Like, we met every week at a local church, actually where Stephanie Yeager's office is, for like 3 months, like every Thursday night. And we were all making sure that everyone had their own action plan. We were helping to find replacement housing in the interim. I'll do another one and then can I switch to you, Amy? So the 2020 was like we didn't get tax credits in 2 consecutive rounds. Like it started to be really competitive. And like, I remember like we ended up not getting an award in a 9% round when we thought we were getting an award. And I remember like crying, like it was so horrible, right? Like we expected it and it just like didn't happen. And what's difficult is when that's the last step before being fully financed and before moving forward with your permits and all this stuff, like you're basically just like hitting pause, right? So that patience that Yasmin talked about, like that was difficult for us to be able to just sort of have to pause on the project. All the while we have an acquisition loan, we have a pre-development loan, it's accruing interest, it's stressful. So those are 2 of the big challenges, but a lot of that, you know, your skin gets thicker as you move through it. Amy, what do you got?
I'm gonna like totally disappoint you. I think in 6 months, I'll lift up some challenges as the service provider. DWC gets way more involved in the occupancy and, you know, learning more. But like Daylight's just been such a fabulous partner holding the weight of the challenges you've lifted up and beyond. But we're just incredibly thrilled that we get to build the field of permanent supportive housing for survivors. Like this is new, and that, you know, Yasmin as a domestic violence organization is getting into PSH is really novel. So yeah, we'll have to come back and we'll tell you more challenges that we'll learn as we get way more as we move into the building.
Cool. Wanted to jump to another question for the 2 of you. Why didn't the project get funded its first 2 times? Were you worried that it would never get tax credits, especially having closed on the land?
Yes. So I can package those 2 questions. So we were, and I apologize for not including all of our partners. You know, it's like a soup of partners to help get these projects done. So Corporation for Supportive Housing, CSH, provided an acquisition and pre-development loan for the project. It's their shelf loan product that I believe is funded with support from the city of Los Angeles. So they provided an acquisition loan as well as some pre-development financing. Genesee LA ended up coming in with additional pre-development financing as well. But that's how we were able to take down the land. And they closed when we were comfortable that we were getting both HHH and No Place Like Home. So they knew that sort of tax credits were that, and project-based vouchers were that final step. Did we think we weren't going to get credits? Like, heck yeah, like I was terrified. It was the first round that 4% were competitive. And we were working with a consultant and we really all just like didn't know how it was going to shake out. This is sort of a weird story, but like they published the list of projects and they had this like bolded line, and every project above that line was projected to be funded and below that line was not, but there was no like instructions on the list. So I like saw our project like right at the bottom below the line, obviously. And I was like, great, we're on the list. Like we're in. I was like, sure that we were good. So yeah, we definitely were nervous, but the good thing, this was in a high resource area, which helps. And then projects that are in, you know, PSH projects are definitely prioritized right now among in the tax credit program. So they've definitely changed the regulations to make sure that these deeply affordable, like highly subsidized projects are getting awarded.
Great. I'm going to pose a question to both groups, and Yasmin, I'm going to kick it off to you to start. This is a question that we've discussed in various workshops, but always happy to hear your own experience, which was from Brandy. Any design considerations specific to this population that you took into consideration when putting together these projects that are different than housing other communities? So how do you design, in this case with Solaris, I know it's 50-50 for DV survivors?
Yeah, so Genesee in a whole creates in our shelter program, shelters that don't look like shelters. So the best way of saying it is that one of our shelter rooms looks like a floor sample in IKEA. We use lots of bright colors, lots of airy things, lots of multifunctional furniture that when someone actually moves to their own permanent housing, they can replicate. So we are not a bunch of cots with gray, gray pillows and everything's dark and lots of light. And so transforming, we know that when bright open spaces and lots of color does its own subconscious healing. So just taking into the green space, places for people to walk, open windows, open spaces is really, really important for your mind, because that allows you to think more clearly and process more clearly. When you go into a dark room, you have dark thoughts. So just looking at all of what we could do to make it open and colorful and movable, and the ability to connect in a safe way, like the courtyard provides, that you don't necessarily have to go outside. You can go to the courtyard and see trees and light, and sit out and read or music or let your kids play. So that was kind of what we were looking at when we were thinking about and what would you want as a person who's entering a new environment, something that has hope and healing, and that's, you know, colorful and not drab. And I mean, it's already kind of like concrete jungle in LA. So whatever we could do to enhance the aesthetics of the building.
Exactly. You know, safety can come through how the lighting is set up, how you enter the building, like one secure entry that ideally has some community aspect around it. You know, your staffing offices right there. We hear from people directly, they want their own privacy, but they want community. So finding ways to balance that in the design. Our toolkit lifts up trauma-informed design ideas and concepts. And after we published the toolkit, then we ran into this organization called, it's an architectural company, I think, called Shopworks in Denver, Colorado. And we've just been like mind blown with their work they've been doing around trauma-informed design. Thankfully, the field is talking about how design can create safety and community for who we serve.
Yeah, and we did a workshop with, what is it, Lauren Nessa? What's her name? Yeah, from Shopworks. And so happy to drop that in the chat to talk about trauma-informed design. So let's see, we got a lot of good questions in here. Here's a question that I have that Raina put into the chat. How do you avoid issues of fair housing if units are restricted to DV only? And that's another person had asked too, like, can you restrict to DV only in the same way we restrict to veteran only units, or does that go against fair housing rules?
So it's not only survivors of DV, there's other homeless populations. So we don't discriminate through that process. So everyone has the ability to apply. Let's say there's a preference that we are looking for. As long as they go through the coordinated entry system. Now that's a must.
Right. And our No Place Like Home funding, we check the box for domestic violence survivors and human trafficking survivors. So, we're anticipating that our funders will support the preference, the affirmative marketing towards these populations. And we do intend to use coordinated entry, which can Yasmin's uplifted the non-HMIS coordinated entry, which is intended for DV survivors whose private health information cannot be entered into HMIS. So it's a way that LAHSA has allowed for DV programs to enter survivors into coordinated entry. So that if you're unhoused living in a DV program, you have access to the housing that we put through the coordinated entry in that way. So we intend to work with LAHSA and ideally bring referrals out from the non-HMIS portal.
That's a great follow-up to a question. Another question, which was like, can you talk about some of those challenges that you have with working or like with doing the workaround for the CES system?
From my perspective, the challenge is more for the survivors that we had to create a workaround for survivors to access housing. Is just like yet another barrier. to housing. But thankfully we've done it, right? Like there was no workaround before, and we were literally effectively barring survivors from permanent housing if they entered through the DV system. So yeah, I mean, LAS has done a ton of work on this and implementing practices compliant with the Violence Against Women's Act that are all well described on their website. So I think our community is ahead of the game from other communities. We've done a lot of work on this to make sure that survivors have access to permanent housing made possible through coordinated entry.
There's a question here that I think opens up a larger conversation around, what the definition of survivor, for example. So, do you welcome male survivors into your housing? And so, talking a bit about like what does that look like in terms of lease up and how and balancing, the broad definition of who can be trafficked, who is a survivor, et cetera.
So this is public housing. So we have to understand this is like going to any other apartment that you apply for. We just have, again, preferences that we would hope. Survivors of domestic violence come in all forms, educational levels, socioeconomic. So if you are a male, if you're LGBTQ, it doesn't, transgender, it doesn't matter. If you are a survivor of domestic violence, if you're homeless, if you're chronically homeless, you have the ability to apply for housing in this building.
Question for the two of you when it comes to the community engagement aspect. Both of you brought up common concerns from the community. And Yasmin, you talked a bit about how to respond to that. But I'm curious, when you go to these meetings and you talk about building and folks say stuff along the lines of, well, it's going to bring crime in, it's going to do this, it's going to do that. What is your response to quell community's fears and bring them on board?
You guys want me to go first?
Sure.
Okay, so we talk about when we're all, and I know everyone who's in LA has seen more so than not homeless people in areas that we would have never imagined them before. And there's lots of complaints. We have, funding that we are paying as taxpayers to improve housing. People have to live somewhere, okay? They do not belong on the streets. And if we have the ability to build housing, provide the education and the services to allow them to maintain their housing, I think that's the best argument that we can give. Do we want to continue to not support, to not build housing and have people continue to live on the streets, which will cause more crime and more danger? Or do we take advantage of this great opportunity to do that? And I always say this to people, all of us, okay? Because we're not Bezos and Bill Gates. We could be a paycheck away from being homeless. If the government was to shut down 2 days ago, there would be a lot of us that would be in trouble. And so you're not that far from homelessness. You could be married, right? If someone dies and you don't have the capacity to keep that mortgage, you could be homeless too. So you can be in these same circumstances. And so you're not above this. And as a viable part of this community, as we talk about, we want to do what we can to ensure that we're looking out for our neighbors and that we don't have people fall into the circumstances that we're trying to remove people from now. So open mind, conversation, listening to why they don't want it, and coming to some type of resolution or solution as to how we can make this work for everyone, I think is a good foundational point.
That was amazing, first of all. But just something that whether it's this project or other projects, I think sometimes, and I think we all need to do a better job, but I think there's a real misunderstanding of transitional housing and shelters versus what's building permanent supportive housing or just traditional affordable housing, right? Like this is not a shelter where someone's coming in on a Tuesday and leaving on Wednesday, right? This is someone with a traditional lease. This is like a lot of times it's a single parent with a child. Like we expect that Noho 50/50 will have a few units with multiple family members. And it's like any other lease. It's like any other building. And I think once you communicate that, I think people understand the difference. I mean, this project that has 7 affordable units, you know, it's working low-income families that make up to $60,000 in household income. Like communicating that, like we are all in that cohort, right? And I think once you create a conversation that's based on like actually providing the detail of those numbers and who we're actually housing, it's like everyone on this call. And I think sometimes there's just a real misunderstanding.
Amy, did you have one more response before we wrap up our conversation?
Helped was to the degree we could one-on-one conversations with people. So I would meet everyone in the crowd and I took down names and had follow-up. We led with our credentials of doing permanent supportive housing for over 35 years now, and our 98% retention rate and how we work with the community. And so that helped. I think for us though, because we had such a amazing experience, the one complaint that kept coming up was parking congestion, which was out of our control, not like exclusive to our project. So that really was the major complaint in our community.
And what do you say with that? You're just like
Self-driving cars.
Yeah.
I took the red line to meetings, so I would say that I just took the red line to the meeting.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's a concern.
Great. Well, I wanted to end on that note, especially because these projects are important to get community buy-in and also to start continue shifting the narratives around what it is that our members are building and why it's important to continue doing so. So Yasmin, Greg, Amy, thank you so much for presenting. Thank you to your projects. We will be sending out the slide deck to folks along with the recording of today's session. So please feel free to reach out to me or to anyone on this call if you have more questions. And with that, have a good rest of your afternoon. Thanks, everyone.